Welcome to Class 17 for Hebrew 1 and 2 for Bright Old Testament 500. We have learned the Kal stem and the Nifal stem. Today we will be learning the Piel stem. As we have mentioned several times, there are stereotyped usages of each of the verb stems in Hebrew. These are often the case, but not always the case. Typically, the Piel is considered an intensive stem, but there are other usages as well, not only intensifying the action, but in some cases causing the action, almost acting more like a hifil, which we have yet to get to. We also have instances where a word has been taken from a noun and made into a verb, and also instances where the Piel indicates repeated action. And there are cases where none of these are true, although these are sometimes true. The Piel stem has the form Piel, or to put it into kata form, Ki-tail, with a hirik under the first root letter, a dagesh in the second root letter, doubling that root letter in order to allow for the short vowel under the first root letter, and a seire under the second root letter. You can compare this to the Kal perfect, which is katal, or the Nifal perfect, which is niktal, and recognize that the Piel is completely different. The dagesh and the hirik give away the Piel in the perfect form. Here is the complete paradigm for the Piel strong perfect verb. Again, you can see the difference between katal and ketail, noticing that the difference between the two is most clearly seen in the presence of the dagesh forte in the middle root letter and the hirik under the first root letter. This is your diagnostic tip for recognizing the Piel. The form of the Piel strong imperfect is yakatel, with a vocal schwa under the first root letter where we would have expected a preformative vowel. This is immediately followed by a patak. This is the diagnostic giveaway in the Piel strong imperfect. We still have the dagesh in the second root letter, and we still have a seire, but the schwa followed by a patak is an automatic sign we are dealing with a Piel verb. Just as in the Kal stem, the Piel imperative is formed by dropping the preformative off of the imperfect verb. Since the preformative in the Piel has a vocal schwa, the first vowel under the first root letter is able to stay the same. Thus we have patak under the first root letter. We still have a dagesh in the second root letter with a seire as the second vowel. The Piel infinitive construct and infinitive absolute are easily recognizable because of the presence of the patak under the first root letter, the dagesh in the second root letter, and a seire under the second root letter. The only difficulty is not so much in differentiating the Piel from the Kal or the Nifal, which are katol in the Kal infinitive absolute and katol in the Kal infinitive construct, or the Nifal, which is niktol or hikatol in the infinitive absolute, and hikatel in the infinitive construct. Instead, the Piel infinitive construct and infinitive absolute can be easily confused with the Piel imperative, so we will have to keep that in mind as we are translating. The Piel participle is easily recognized, for one thing because there's a mem on the front. This mem is actually an indicator of the participle in all stems except for the Kal and the Nifal. We will have a mem prefix in the Piel, the Pual, the Hafel, the Hifil, and the Hithpael. However, the giveaway that this is a Piel is that there is a schwa immediately followed by a patak. Anytime you see a schwa under a preformative followed by a patak, you know you are dealing with the Piel. Again, there is still the dagesh in the midst of the second letter as further confirmation that this is indeed a Piel participle. Here is the entire Piel verbal paradigm: ketail, yakatel, katail, 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 mukatail. Again, you can see the repetition of katail. The Piel has a hirik in the perfect, but all other stems have a patak. Again, distinguishing the Piel from other stems because of the schwa and the patak, simply the patak, or the schwa under a mem followed by a patak. You can see this is quite different from the Kal stem. There are only a few weak verbs that create problems within the Piel stem. One of these is third-hate, third-ayin verbs that are very similar to other third-guttural verbs that prefer A-class vowels instead of I-class vowels. Thus, in the majority of forms of the Piel weak verb with third hate and third ayin, we will have a replacement of the sere with a patak. The only time this does not happen is when the sere appears alongside a patak, such as the infinitive absolute and the participle, that place a furtive patak under the hate. You can see the difference between the strong verb and the weak verb and simply the replacement of the sere by the patak. Third-aleph verbs behave quite differently from other third-gutturals, and that is because the aleph quiesces, allowing the sere to remain as a sere without having to become a patak. Thus, the strong verb in the Piel is almost identical to this particular weak verb, the one exception being the infinitive absolute that has an alternate form with a holum over the second root letter. You may remember that the cal infinitive construct in the cal infinitive absolute also has a holum over the second root letter. However, in the infinitive absolute, there will also be a vav. In the infinitive construct, there will not be a patak under the first root letter, but a vocal schwa. Also, in both the infinitive construct and infinitive absolute in the cal stem, there is no dagesh in the second root letter, but Piel will always have a dagesh in the second root letter, indicating that this is a Piel infinitive absolute and not a cal. The last guttural to talk about is hey. Thus, third hey verbs are another weak verb that we need to talk about in the Piel. You will notice, though, in third hey verbs that the hey, as in other stems in Hebrew, takes the same vowels in each form as it does in other stems. Thus, a perfect will always have kametz hey. An imperfect will always have segol hey. An imperative will always have sere hey. An infinitive construct will always drop the hey and add holum vav tav. The infinitive absolute will always have sere hey, and the participle will always have segol hey. However, as you look at this, you may think that the perfect 2ms listed here is very similar to the nifal, since there's a dagesh in the first root letter and a hirik under that first root letter. However, a nun in the nifal will always appear in the perfect, so there will be no dagesh in the first root letter, and there will be no dagesh in the second root letter because this is a Piel. Also, as a side note, the letter under the second root letter in the nifal is a sere, not hirik, as here it is hirik yod. Typically it is sere yod within the nifal, but really the giveaway is the fact that there is no nun and that there's a lot of dageshes. Throughout the other forms, you can still see the presence of that patak that gives away that we are in the Piel stem, whereas the nifal always has kametz. Again, as a repetition, here are the third hey diagnostics. Keeping in mind, you are going to see this chart in every single stem we cover. Perfect always ends in kametz hey. Imperfect always ends in segol hey. Imperative always ends in sere hey. Infinitive construct always ends in holum vav tav. And the participle always ends in segol hey. Typically, we think of weak verbs as making verb identification more difficult. However, in the Piel, the weak verb in geminate verbs actually makes verb identification easier. This is because all three of the letters of the geminate form will appear in the Piel, rather than dropping one of the letters off and replacing it with a dagesh. The dagesh that is in the second root letter is not the third root letter because the third root letter appears. Instead, the second root letter has a dagesh because this is Piel. Occasionally, we find a word that has a guttural as the second root letter. This creates a problem because gutturals do not take dagesh forte, and the Piel requires that we place a dagesh forte in the second root letter. What are we supposed to do? Well, one of two things will happen. Either the dagesh forte will be implicit, that is, that it is assumed even though it is not written, in which case the patak will still be the giveaway that we have a Piel, or there will be a lengthening of the patak to a kametz, in which case we will have a schwa followed by a kametz in the imperfect rather than a schwa followed by a patak. However, if you stop and consider the fact that there is no dagesh because resh does not take dagesh, this should remind you that it was originally a patak. Thus, you should still be able to figure out, even with a second root letter guttural, that this is a Piel. Again, for those of you who prefer the whole paradigm, here is the entire chart with all of the possible weak verbs alongside the strong verb so that you can see that very few changes actually take place within the PL stem. Well, that's it already. Hopefully you're saying, wow, that was easy. Use the Quizlet, learn your vocab, and I will see you in class.